Sheriff Dale Hawkins knelt, the grit of the forest floor digging into his knees. The smell hit him first. It was coppery, like old pennies, but with a rotten sweetness underneath, like fruit left too long in the sun. He'd smelled death before. Plenty of times. Car wrecks, hunting accidents, one bad domestic dispute that ended with a shotgun. This was different. This smelled wrong, like a violation of the natural order. Before him lay what was left of Old Man Hemlock. The town eccentric, the guy who lived in a shack up on Ridgeback Mountain and yelled at airplanes. Except it wasn't really Hemlock anymore. The body, dressed in its usual flannel and denim, was hollowed out, not eaten by animals. The skin and clothes were peeled back from the chest cavity in a way that looked disturbingly like a blossoming flower. The ribs were snapped outward, clean breaks, like a cage that had been burst open from the inside. There was no blood, no gore, just a dry, papery husk. The inside of the torso was coated with a strange amber-colored residue that flaked when Dale touched it with the tip of his pen. It felt like dried resin. His deputy, a young kid named Ben, was behind a tree, emptying the contents of his stomach. Dale couldn't blame him. This wasn't something they trained you for at the academy. It wasn't human evil. It was something else entirely. Dale stood up, his joints cracking. He shined his flashlight around the small clearing. The ground was disturbed. Not with footprints, but with a series of long, thin scratches in the dirt, all radiating away from the body. Like something with many sharp legs had dragged itself out of Hemlock and skittered away into the darkness. He felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was a primal fear, the kind your ancestors felt when they heard a saber-toothed tiger in the tall grass. He thought of his daughter, Lily, safe in her bed back in town. A sudden, fierce need to protect her washed over him, so strong it made him dizzy. He keyed his radio, his thumb trembling slightly. "Ben," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "When you are done there, call Dr. Thorne. Tell him to meet me at the morgue, and tell him to bring his strongest microscope." Something came out of Old Man Hemlock, and I think it's still out here. Harmony Creek was a town that time had mostly forgotten, nestled in a Colorado valley like a forgotten toy. Life moved at the speed of changing seasons. Dale liked it that way. It was why he'd moved back here after his wife died, to give Lily a slice of the quiet life he'd known as a kid. But the quiet was starting to feel different. It felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The day after they found Hemlock, a strange sickness started to creep through town. It began as a whisper. Mrs. Gable from the bakery called in sick, something she hadn't done in 20 years. Then a handful of kids were sent home from school, complaining of headaches and a deep, rattling cough. Dr. Thorne called it an aggressive strain of the flu. He told Dale not to worry. People get sick. But the people weren't just sick. They were strange. Their skin took on a pale, clammy look, and their eyes seemed sunken and dark. They were irritable. Fights broke out over parking spots at the general store. A quiet librarian named Martha Jennings stood on Main Street and screamed at the sky for a solid 10 minutes before her husband could coax her home. Dale saw it himself at the diner. A trucker named Gus, a man usually full of bad jokes and easy laughter, sat staring at his coffee. He was scratching his forearm, a methodical, repetitive motion. Dale walked over. "Everything okay, Gus?" Gus looked up, and his eyes were not his own. They were flat, distant. "Itchy," he mumbled. "It's under the skin. I can feel it moving." He dug his fingernails in deeper, drawing thin lines of blood. Dale gently took his arm. "Easy there, Gus. Let's get you over to Doc Thorne's." Gus didn't resist. He was docile, almost like a sleepwalker. As Dale led him out, he saw others in the diner. They were watching, not with concern, but with a blank, unnerving curiosity. They were all scratching. Some at their necks, others at their arms, all with that same slow, rhythmic motion. Later that night, Dale sat in his patrol car on a bluff, overlooking the town. The lights of Harmony Creek twinkled below, a little pocket of warmth in the vast cold darkness of the mountains. But it didn't feel warm tonight. It felt like a petri dish. Dr. Thorne had called him an hour ago. The blood samples from the sick townspeople were odd. The white cell count was through the roof, but not in a way that indicated a normal infection. "It's like their immune system isn't fighting something, Dale," Thorne had said, his voice tight with confusion. "It's like it's dueling something." Dale hung up the phone and stared at his own hands on the steering wheel. He felt a phantom itch on the back of his neck and fought the urge to scratch. The radio crackled to life. It was Ben, his voice high and strained. "Sheriff? You need to get to the Miller farm now. It's happening again." The Miller farm smelled of hay, manure, and the same wrong, coppery sweetness that had clung to Old Man Hemlock. John Miller was a good man, a farmer with hands like leather and a quiet strength. Dale found him in the barn, slumped against a stack of hay bales. The scene was a horrifying echo of the one on the mountain. The same burst-open chest, the same snapped ribs, the same hollowed-out look. But this was worse. John's wife, Sarah, was there, huddled in a corner, her body racked with sobs that made no sound. Her 2 young sons stood beside her, staring at their father's empty shell with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Dale felt a rage build in his chest, hot and useless. He led the family out of the barn, handing them over to Ben, who looked even greener than he had on the mountain. "Get them back to town," Dale ordered, his voice low. "Don't let them go home." He went back inside the barn, forcing himself to look, to be a cop, to find a clue. He saw the same thin scratches in the dirt floor, leading away from the body and disappearing through a gap in the barn wall. Whatever had come out of John Miller was bigger than what came out of Hemlock. The scratches were deeper, farther apart. He knelt down, his flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. He saw something else. A small shed piece of the amber-colored resin he'd found inside Hemlock. It was stuck to a splinter of wood. He carefully pried it loose with his pocket knife and sealed it in an evidence bag. He drove straight to Dr. Thorne's clinic. The small building was usually a place of comfort, smelling of antiseptic and coffee. Tonight it smelled of fear. Thorne, a man whose silver hair and calm demeanor usually inspired confidence, looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wide and bloodshot behind his glasses. "To Dale," Thorne said without preamble, gesturing for Dale to come into the lab. In 2 days. This isn't a serial killer. A person doesn't do that." "I know," Dale said, placing the evidence bag on the counter. "I found this." Thorne snatched the bag, his hands shaking as he prepared to slide. He worked in silence, his face illuminated by the glow of the microscope. The only sounds were the hum of the equipment and Thorne's ragged breathing. Dale paced the small room. The image of John Miller's sons burned into his mind. "What is it, Eris?" he finally asked. "What's doing this?" Thorne looked up from the microscope, and the color had drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just stared into the abyss. "It's not a resin, Dale," he whispered. "It's biological. It's chitin, like an insect's exoskeleton. But the cellular structure, it's not like anything I've ever seen. It's not from Earth." Dale felt the floor drop out from under him. "What you talking about, aliens?" The word sounded ridiculous. Stupid. "I don't know what to call them," Thorne said, his voice trembling. "But that's not the worst part. I analyzed the blood of the people with this flu again. I cross-referenced it with the material from Hemlock's body. T here is a marker. A dormant retrovirus embedded in our junk DNA. It's in all of us, Dale. In every human being. It's been there forever, just waiting. This sickness, this isn't a sickness. It's an activation. Activation of what?" Thorne took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound defeat. "It's a blueprint," he said, his voice barely audible. "A set of instructions. Something is turning it on, and is telling our bodies how to build something. We're not getting sick, Dale. We're gestating." The word hung in the air of the lab, heavy and obscene. Gestating. Dale felt a wave of nausea. He looked down at his own arms, at the veins under his skin. He thought of Lily, of her cough that morning. He had told her it was just a cold. "No," Dale said, shaking his head. "That's crazy, Eris. We're talking science fiction, are we?" Thorne gestured wildly at the microscope, at the data on his computer screen. "Look at the evidence. 2 men have literally given birth to something horrible. Half the town is walking around with the early symptoms. The biology is undeniable. It's a parasite, Dale, one that uses our own cellular machinery to grow. It's the most efficient invasion in history. They don't need ships or weapons. They just need us." Dale's mind reeled, trying to process the impossible. The sickness, the scratching, the strange behavior. It wasn't madness. It was a biological process. The itching wasn't just in their heads. They really could feel something moving under their skin, because there was. The phone on Thorne's desk rang, shrill and demanding. Thorne stared at it as if it were a snake. Dale snatched it up. "Sheriff Hawkins." It was Mary from dispatch. Her voice was a terrified squeak. "Sheriff, you have to, oh God, it's the school. Something's happening at the elementary school." Dale's blood ran cold. "Lily," he breathed. He was out the door before Thorne could say another word, his siren screaming as he tore through the quiet streets of Harmony Creek. The town was no longer quiet. People were stumbling out of their homes, their faces pale and sweaty in the flashing blue and red lights. Some were moaning. Others were clawing at their own faces, their eyes wide with a terror that was not entirely sane. He skidded to a halt in front of the school. The front doors were shattered. Small, terrified children were streaming out, crying, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Teachers were trying to herd them, their own faces masks of panic. Dale pushed through the chaos, his gun in his hand. "Lily! Lily Hawkins!" he yelled, his voice raw with fear. He found her huddled with a group of other second graders behind a teacher's car. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. She ran to him, burying her face in his leg. "Daddy, Mr. Henderson got sick," she cried. "He got real sick." "What happened, honey? What did he do?" "He was scratching," she sobbed. And then he started screaming. He fell down, and his back broke open. Dale held her tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the other teachers. A young woman named Miss Albright nodded, her eyes wide with horror. "It was just like you see in a horror movie, Sheriff. His spine just do. It just split. And this thing. This long skinny thing with too many legs. It crawled out. It ran into the gym." A wet, chittering sound, accompanied by the scrape of something hard and sharp against the linoleum floor. He had to go in. He had to kill it. He turned to Miss Albright. "Get these kids to the sheriff's station. Barricade the doors. Don't let anyone in unless you know them. Go now." He kissed the top of Lily's head. "Be brave for me, sweetie. I'll be right behind you." He watched them run towards the relative safety of the town hall, a small knot of humanity fleeing the unbelievable. Then he turned, took a deep breath, and stepped into the school. The darkness inside was absolute, and the only sound was the scuttling of the newborn thing that had once been a second-grade teacher. The school hallway was a tunnel of shadows, smelling of chalk dust and fresh terror. Dale moved slowly, his pistol held in a two-handed grip, the small beam of his flashlight cutting a nervous path in front of him. Every locker door seemed to hide a threat. Every shadow seemed to move. The chittering, scraping sound was louder now, coming from the gymnasium at the end of the hall. It was a sound that scraped along his nerves, a deeply unnatural rhythm. He reached the double doors of the gym. One was slightly ajar. He pushed it open with the barrel of his gun and slipped inside. The cavernous room was lit only by the pale moonlight filtering through the high windows. It cast long, distorted shadows across the basketball court. In the center of the room, crouched over the crumpled form of what used to be Mr. Henderson, was the creature. It was worse than he could have imagined. It was about the size of a large dog, but its body was segmented and insect-like, covered in the same amber-colored chitin he'd seen before. It had at least 8 long, spindly legs, each ending in a viciously sharp point. 2 smaller, grasping limbs near its head were tearing at the remains of its former host. Not to eat, but seemingly out of some instinctive, searching curiosity. It had no eyes that he could see, just a smooth, featureless head that swiveled back and forth, sensing the environment. It paused its gruesome work and lifted its head, turning directly towards him. It couldn't see him, but it knew he was there. It let out a high-pitched shriek, a sound that was half insect buzz and half human scream. It was the last sound Mr. Henderson ever made. The creature unfolded its legs and rose to a terrifying height. It was fast, unbelievably fast. It scuttled towards him, its sharp feet clicking on the polished wood floor like 100 tiny knives. Dale didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet ricocheted off the creature's armored head with a sharp crack, whining off into the darkness. It didn't even slow down. He fired again, aiming for the joints in its legs. One shot connected, the leg buckled, and the creature stumbled, shrieking in pain and fury. It gave him the second he needed. He turned and ran, not out of cowardice, but out of a sudden, stark realization. His gun was useless. This wasn't a fight he could win with bullets. He sprinted back down the hallway, the creature's furious clicks echoing behind him. He burst out of the school's front doors and didn't stop running until he reached his patrol car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands slick with sweat, and peeled away from the curb, leaving the school and its nightmare tenant behind. He drove straight for the sheriff's station. The building, which doubled as the town hall, was lit up like a fortress. Ben stood at the door with a shotgun, his face grim. Dale pushed past him and found the main hall filled with terrified townspeople. He saw Lily, safe in the arms of Miss Albright, and a wave of relief washed over him. So powerful, it almost buckled his knees. He found Dr. Thorne in a small office, hunched over a portable radio. "I saw one," Dale said, his voice breathless. "In the school. It came out of Henderson. My gun, Eris, it barely scratched it." Thorne didn't look surprised, he just looked tired. "Of course," he said quietly. "It's biomechanical. Its exoskeleton is a keratin metal matrix. Grown, not forged. Stronger than steel. Our own bodies provide the raw materials. How do we stop them? Dale demanded. Thorne pointed a trembling finger at the radio. He had it tuned to a strange frequency, one that was mostly static. But underneath the static, there was a faint, rhythmic pulse, a soft, repeating signal. That's how, Thorne said, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. It's a signal, a broadcast. It's what activated the retrovirus. It's the on switch. The creatures, I think they're just the first stage. The drones, the soldiers, they're clearing the field. The signal is what we have to stop, but I don't know where it's coming from. Suddenly, the lights in the station flickered and died. The hum of the emergency generator kicked in, casting the room in a dim, unsteady glow. Outside, a new sound began. It was the sound of screaming. Not just one person, but dozens. It was followed by a chorus of high-pitched chittering shrieks. They weren't just in the school anymore. They were hatching all over town. The sheriff's station became an ark in a storm of monsters. The sounds from outside were a symphony of hell. The wet, tearing sound of a hatching, followed by a human scream, cut short. Then the piercing shriek of the newborn creature. It happened over and over again. The town was a nursery, and the birth process was fatal. Inside, the survivors huddled together, their faces pale in the flickering emergency lights. Fear was a physical presence in the room, a cold, heavy blanket. Dale moved through the crowd, trying to project a calm he did not feel. Keep the doors barricaded, he told Ben. Board up the windows. Don't waste ammunition unless they get inside. He found Lily and pulled her into a tight hug. It's going to be okay, he lied, stroking her hair. She was shivering, not from cold, but from terror. He felt a deep, primal rage at the things outside for putting that fear in his daughter's eyes. He joined Thorne in the small office. The doctor was frantically working, surrounded by medical texts and printouts. He had a map of the local area spread out on the desk. I've been thinking, Thorne said, his voice strained. The signal. It has to be powerful to penetrate buildings and activate something on a cellular level, but it also has to be localized. If it was coming from space, the whole world would be hatching right now. Dale followed his logic. So the source is somewhere close. Exactly, Thorne said, tapping the map. It needs a power source and an antenna, a significant one. There aren't many places like that around here. His finger landed on a spot high in the mountains ringing the valley. The old Cold War-era radio relay tower on Sentinel Peak. It had been decommissioned for 30 years, but the tower and its generator building were still up there. It's the perfect spot, Dale said, a grim certainty settling in his gut. High altitude, its own power supply. No one ever goes up there. The aliens, or whatever they are, they're not just biological geniuses. They're strategists, Thorne muttered, more to himself than to Dale. They didn't just seed us with their offspring. They set up the trigger, right in our backyard, waiting for the right moment. This isn't an invasion, it's a harvest. A sudden, loud bang on the main doors made everyone in the hall jump. It was followed by a sharp scraping sound. Dale and Ben ran to the reinforced door, peering through the small barred window. A creature was outside. It was larger than the one from the school, its chitinous shell darker, thicker. It slammed its body against the door again, the wood groaning in protest. It wasn't just mindless aggression. It was testing for weakness. It scraped one of its sharp legs against the metal bars of the window, creating a shower of sparks and a sound that set Dale's teeth on edge. Then another. Soon a dozen of them were surrounding the station, their featureless heads swiveling, their legs clicking on the pavement. They weren't attacking frantically. They were organized, they were assessing. "My God," Ben whispered, his face as white as a sheet. "They're intelligent." Thorn had come up behind them. "They're not just drones," he said, his voice filled with a new level of horror. "They're a hive, and that signal we're hearing, it's not just a trigger, it's a command frequency. They're being coordinated." He looked from the creatures outside to the map on his desk. "Someone or something is up on that mountain directing them. We're not just fighting monsters, Dale. We're fighting an army, and we're trapped in here with a dwindling clock. Everyone in this room who got sick. They're a time bomb." Dale looked over at the crowd of townspeople. He saw the pale, sweaty skin. He saw the involuntary scratching. He saw it on the face of Mrs. Gable from the bakery. He saw it on the face of a teenage boy who had bagged his groceries last week. And then, with a jolt of pure ice in his veins, he saw it on his own daughter. Lily was sitting in the corner, unconsciously scratching the back of her hand, her eyes looking distant and glazed. The blueprint was inside her too, and the clock was ticking. The siege began in earnest. The creatures outside stopped their probing and started a full-scale assault. They threw their bodies against the walls of the station, the impacts shaking the entire building. The sound was a constant, deafening drumbeat of chitin against brick. They clawed at the boarded-up windows, the splintering of wood mixing with their high-pitched shrieks. Panic erupted in the main hall. People screamed and cried. A man named Peterson, who ran the hardware store, lost his nerve. "We're all going to die in here," he shrieked, his eyes wild. "They're going to get in." He made a mad dash for a side door, fumbling with the lock. Before Dale could stop him, he had it open and was silhouetted for a moment against the dark chaos outside. A spindly, razor-sharp leg shot out of the darkness and impaled him through the chest. He was dragged out into the night, his scream cut off with a sickening, wet gurgle. Then slammed the door shut and threw the bolt just as a creature smashed against it from the other side. The event shocked the hall into a terrified silence. The reality of their situation had become brutally clear. There was no escape. Dale's focus narrowed to one single terrifying point: Lily. He knelt in front of her. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. The scratching on her hand was more frantic now. "Lily, sweetie, look at me," he said, his voice tight. Her eyes met his, but they were cloudy, unfocused. "It's so loud, Daddy," she whispered. "Inside my head, like buzzing bees." It was the signal. Thorn was right. It was affecting those in the gestation phase more directly. It was coaxing the thing inside her, nurturing it, telling it to grow faster. "We have to get to that tower," Dale said to Thorn, pulling him aside. "We have to shut it down. It's the only way." "How?" Thorn asked, gesturing to the besieged building. "We can't even get out the door. It's suicide. Staying here is suicide." Dale countered, his voice a harsh whisper. "It's just slower. Look at them, Aris. Look at my daughter. How long do you think we have before people start hatching in here with us?" The thought was so horrifying it stole the air from the room, a monster born in their midst, in their sanctuary. Just then one of the creatures found a weak spot. It smashed through a high window in the records room, showering the floor with glass. Ben and two other men, armed with a fire axe and a crowbar, rushed into the room. Dale heard shouting, the crash of furniture, and the awful, piercing shriek of the creature. He ran in to help. The room was a wreck. Filing cabinets were overturned. The creature, smaller than the ones at the front door, but just as lethal, was cornered behind a desk. It lunged at Ben, who fired his shotgun at point-blank range. The blast tore through the creature's midsection, splattering the walls with a thick yellowish fluid that smelled like ozone. The thing convulsed and went still. Ben leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Got it," he panted. But Thorne, who had followed Dale, was staring at the dead creature with a look of scientific horror. "Dale, look," he said, pointing at the wound. Inside the torn exoskeleton, among the ruined alien biology, were recognizable human organs. A twisted, half-formed lung, a piece of a liver. "It doesn't just grow inside us," Thorne breathed. "It incorporates us. It merges with our tissue. That thing." That thing was part of someone we knew. The revelation was a physical blow. These monsters weren't just invaders. They were the townspeople. They were their friends and neighbors, twisted and remade into nightmares. The war wasn't against an external foe. They were fighting themselves. Dale looked at the dead creature on the floor, then back towards the main hall, where his daughter was slowly being rewritten from the inside out. His resolve hardened into a cold, sharp point. He didn't care what it took. He was going to that tower. "T here is a maintenance tunnel," Dale said, his voice low and urgent. He had gathered Thorne and Ben in the small, cramped office. It runs from the basement boiler room to the storm drain system under Main Street. Old town plans. I had to study them when they redid the pipes a few years ago. It's our only way out." "Through the sewers?" Ben asked, his face wrinkled in disgust. "They'll be down there," Thorne warned. "They're not just on the surface, they'll be everywhere." "It's a chance," Dale insisted. "A better chance than we have in here. We wait here, we die, or we become that." He nodded towards the records room. The decision was made in silence. The three of them would go. Someone had to stay behind to guard the others, to keep the barricades up. A grizzled old rancher named Hank, who had a steady hand and a calmer head than most, volunteered. Dale went to Lily. He knelt down and held her small, cold hands. Her eyes were still clouded, and she was muttering to herself. Nonsense words mixed with the buzzing sound she said she heard. "I have to go do something, sweetie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am going to make the buzzing stop. You be brave for Hank, you hear me?" She looked at him, and for a fleeting second, a glimmer of recognition of his Lily shone through. "Be careful, Daddy," she whispered. The words were a knife in his heart. He kissed her forehead, a promise he intended to keep, and turned away before she could see the tears in his eyes. The basement was dark and damp, smelling of dust and rust. The entrance to the tunnel was behind an old, decommissioned boiler, hidden by a sheet of rusted metal. It took all their strength to pull it aside, revealing a dark, gaping hole. The air that wafted out was foul, a mix of sewage, and that now familiar coppery scent of the creatures. Armed with flashlights, Dale's pistol, Ben's shotgun, and a crowbar for Thorne, they descended into the darkness. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to crouch. The pipe dripped with unseen liquids. The only sounds were their own breathing and the distant, rhythmic thumping from the siege above. They moved for what felt like an eternity. Then they heard it. A scraping sound from the tunnel ahead. Dale motioned for them to stop, cutting his light. They stood in absolute blackness, listening. The scraping grew closer, accompanied by a soft, wet clicking. Dale risked a quick flash of his light. 20 yards ahead, a creature was crawling towards them, its featureless head turning from side to side. It was smaller, a fresh hatchling, but no less deadly in the confined space. There was no room to run, no room to maneuver. Ben raised his shotgun, but Dale put a hand on his arm. "The noise will bring more," he whispered. "We do this quiet." He took the crowbar from Thorne. He was the one in front. It had to be him. He waited, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The creature came closer, sensing them, its head tilting with an eerie curiosity. When it was 10 feet away, Dale moved. He didn't rush. He took 2 quick, silent steps forward and swung the heavy iron crowbar with all his might. He aimed for the head. The impact was a sickening, wet crunch. The creature convulsed, its legs thrashing wildly, scraping against the concrete walls of the pipe. Dale hit it again and again, blind fury fueling his arms. He didn't stop until the thing was a broken, twitching mass of chitin and gore. He stood over it, panting, the crowbar dripping with yellow fluid. He had done it. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying, because from farther down the tunnel they heard an answering shriek, and then another, and another. The single creature had been a scout, and they had just announced their presence to the entire hive. "Run," Dale gasped. They scrambled through the pipe, their feet slipping in the muck, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. They burst out of a storm drain into the cold night air, gasping and covered in filth. They were on the edge of town, at the base of the winding mountain road that led up to Sentinel Peak. The town behind them was a cacophony of shrieks and alarms. Ahead, the mountain was a silent, dark giant. The radio tower on its peak was a thin needle against the star-filled sky, invisible to the naked eye, but burned into Dale's mind. "The station's truck," Ben panted, pointing towards a small maintenance shed 50 yards away. "We keep a 4-wheel drive up here for winter emergencies." It was their only hope. The trek up the mountain on foot would take hours they didn't have. They ran for the shed, keeping low, their eyes scanning the darkness. The town was the main focus of the creature's attention, but they couldn't assume they were safe. The creatures were everywhere. Ben jimmied the lock with a tire iron, and they piled into the old, battered pickup. The engine turned over with a protesting groan before finally catching. Dale put the truck in gear and sped onto the mountain road, tires squealing on the asphalt. The road was treacherous, a series of switchbacks carved into the face of the mountain. Dale drove with a desperate focus, the headlights cutting a frantic path through the pines. Thorne was in the passenger seat, fiddling with his portable radio. The pulsing signal was getting stronger, clearer. "We're getting close," he said, his voice grim. "Whatever is broadcasting, it's powerful." As they rounded a sharp curve, their headlights swept across the road and illuminated a figure standing in their path. Dale slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. It was a creature, but it was different from the others. It stood on 2 legs, its form disturbingly humanoid, though its limbs were too long, its body unnaturally thin. Its head was smooth and featureless like the others, but it didn't move with the same skittering animalistic energy. It stood with a calm, deliberate stillness that was profoundly more terrifying. It tilted its head, as if studying them. "What is that?" Ben whispered from the back seat. "It's an upgrade," Thorne breathed, his face a mask of awe and terror. "The drones clear the area. Then comes the next stage. The commanders, the ones with more processing power." The creature took a step towards them. It raised one of its long, thin arms, and the end split open, revealing not a hand, but a cluster of writhing, metallic-looking tendrils. Before Dale could react, it lashed out. The tendril struck the front of the truck with incredible force, punching through the engine block as if it were cardboard. Steam and oil erupted from under the hood. The humanoid creature started walking towards them, its pace unhurried, confident. "Out!" Dale yelled. "Now! Into the woods!" They scrambled out of the truck and plunged into the dense forest that lined the road. branches whipped at their faces. They could hear the creature behind them, moving through the undergrowth with an unnatural silence. They were being hunted. "We have to split up," Dale gasped, pulling them to a stop behind a rocky outcrop. "It can't follow all of us, Ben. You are the fastest. Go straight for the tower. Get to the generator building and cut the power. Do whatever you have to do, just shut it down." "What about you?" Ben asked, his young face pale but determined. "We'll lead it away," Dale said, looking at Thorn. "We'll buy you time." There was no time for argument. Dale gave Ben the last of his ammunition. "Go," he ordered. Ben gave him a single, grim nod and disappeared into the darkness. Dale and Thorn waited, their backs pressed against the cold stone. They heard the creature moving closer. "Aris," Dale said quietly. "If I don't make it." "Lily, I know," Thorn said, his voice steady. "I'll look after her." The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing. It stopped, its blank face turning from side to side, sensing them. Dale took a deep breath. He picked up a rock and threw it as far as he could down the slope. The creature's head snapped towards the sound. Dale broke cover and ran in the opposite direction, yelling at the top of his lungs. "Hey, hey, you ugly bastard. Over here." The creature turned its full attention now on him. It began to move in his direction. Dale ran, his lungs burning, his only thought to lead this new nightmare away from the path to the tower, away from the only hope his daughter had left. Dale ran through the woods with the reckless abandon of a man who had nothing left to lose but time. The bipedal creature followed, relentless and silent. It wasn't fast, but it was tireless. Dale could hear it moving through the trees behind him, a steady, measured pursuit. He was a lure, and the fish was on the line. He risked a glance over his shoulder. It was gaining. He pushed himself harder, his legs screaming in protest. He burst out of the woods onto a narrow cliffside path. On one side was a solid wall of rock, on the other, a sheer drop into the darkened valley below. There was nowhere else to run. He was trapped. He turned to face his pursuer. The creature emerged from the trees and stopped at the edge of the path, its long, thin frame silhouetted against the moon. It was a perfect killing machine, an alien intelligence wrapped in a shell grown from human flesh. Dale had his pistol, but he knew it was useless. He had the crowbar, but he knew he couldn't get close enough to use it. He looked down into the valley. He could see the faint lights of the sheriff's station, a tiny beacon of hope in a world gone mad. He thought of Lily. He pictured her face, her smile, the way she felt in his arms, the buzzing in her head, the thing growing inside her. A fierce, desperate love surged through him, burning away the fear. He would not let that thing win. He would not let it take his daughter. The creature took a step forward. Dale took one back, his heel dislodging a few loose stones that tumbled into the abyss. An idea, insane and final, sparked in his mind. "Come on then," he yelled, his voice raw. "You want me? Come and get me." He charged. Not at the creature, but past it, back the way he came. The move was so unexpected that the creature was slow to react. Dale scraped past its thin body, his shoulders slamming against it. He felt the cold, hard smoothness of its chitinous skin. He didn't stop. He ran 10 feet back down the path and then spun around. The creature had turned and was now coming for him, its tendril hand raised to strike. Dale waited until it was almost on him. Then, with every ounce of strength he had left, he lowered his shoulder and lunged forward, tackling the creature around its narrow waist. The impact drove the air from his lungs. The creature was surprisingly light. its body a hollow framework of alien bone and repurposed human tissue. But its strength was immense. It struggled, its sharp limbs flailing. Dale held on, his arms wrapped around it in a death grip. He drove forward, pushing them both towards the edge of the cliff. For a terrifying moment they teetered on the brink, a grotesque parody of a dance. The creature shrieked, a sound of fury and confusion. Dale looked up one last time at the stars, and he whispered his daughter's name. Then he pushed off with his legs and threw their combined weight into the empty air. They fell together into the darkness. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind roared in his ears. He held tight to the monster, his anchor to oblivion. He felt its limbs thrash, and then as they tumbled through the air, he felt a sudden final stillness. They hit the treetops with a violent crash of breaking branches, and then the world went black. "Aid at the station," Lily cried out. She sat bolt upright, her eyes wide. The buzzing in her head, the constant oppressive signal was gone. The silence was deafening. She looked at her hands. The urge to scratch was gone. The clammy feeling on her skin was receding. Up on the mountain, Ben reached the generator building. He found the main breaker and threw the heavy switch. The hum of machinery died. The lights on the tower's antenna blinked out. The signal was severed. All across Harmony Creek, the creatures faltered. Their shrieks turned from organized hunting calls to cries of confusion and pain. Without the signal guiding them, they were just mindless, disconnected things. They began to turn on each other, a chaotic frenzy of screeching and tearing limbs. Dr. Thorne stood at the window of the station, watching the self-destruction. They had won. They had cut the head off the snake. But he knew the truth: they hadn't destroyed the blueprint. They had only turned off the switch. The dormant code was still there, woven into the very fabric of humanity, sleeping in the DNA of every man, woman, and child on the planet, waiting. All the aliens had to do was send another signal. All they had to do was flip the switch again. The war wasn't over. It had just been postponed. The blueprint was patient. It was eternal.